Italia 90 was arguably the worst World Cup in history in terms of the football played. Cynical defensive play dominated. It produced the fewest goals per game the tournament had ever seen, alongside a then record 16 red cards. Goalless draws and 1-0 wins accounted for 38% of all matches. Add 1-1 draws and you've got over half the games. Count every match with 2 goals or fewer and you're approaching 2/3. Something clearly had to change. Back then, a win was only worth 2 points, which reduced the incentive to push for victory. A draw was considered a far more acceptable outcome for top teams than it is now, so sides were often content to take a point instead of attacking, leading to more negative defensive football. To encourage more attacking play, FIFA introduced 3 points for a win instead of 2 at the 1994 World Cup. But the idea itself went back much further. It was first implemented in England in 1981, after being proposed by Jimmy Hill. An English everything, really. Other early adopters were, for a lack of a better word, quite random. Israel, New Zealand, Iceland. Over time, 3 points for a win gained traction and was almost universally adopted by the mid-1990s. But that doesn't mean it's universally praised. Critics argue it makes teams more defensive when ahead, widens the gap between top sides and the rest, and leads to less dramatic title races. However, most people would agree that football has improved with the 3-point system. But that was only part of the solution for the problems at Italia 90. The tournament was also plagued by relentless backpassing and goalkeepers holding the ball to waste time, which was widespread in the sport as a whole. Although the tactic is perhaps most infamously associated with Denmark at Euro 92, Italia 90 was the main catalyst for the backpass rule, which prevents goalkeepers from handling the ball in most situations when it's played back to them by a teammate. The problems at the 1990 World Cup weren't unique to that tournament, but it's still fair to view Italia 90 as the straw that broke the camel's back and led FIFA to introduce the backpass rule and 3 points for a win. The changes worked. USA 94 featured far more entertaining matches, and a goal per game ratio better than any World Cup since as of making this video, and much better than 1990. Italia 90 also isn't helped by Sweden losing every match, but for some countries it was a memorable World Cup. England needed it. Before the tournament, English football was widely viewed as dirty, violent and shameful, and not without reason. Liverpool fans were primarily responsible for the Hazel Stadium disaster, in which 39 people lost their lives, leading UEFA to ban English clubs from European competitions for 5 years, and Liverpool for 6. The Hillsborough disaster wasn't caused by fans like Hazel, but that wasn't globally understood at the time, despite the Taylor report, and the reputation of England's supporters suffered as a result. But even without those tragedies, English football did have a serious hooliganism problem. So much so that the British sports minister urged that England be based in Cagliari at Italia 90, partly to keep potential hooligans away from larger cities. On the pitch, things weren't much better. England lost every match at Euro 88, against 2 teams they'd later face at Italia 90. This time, they improved slightly, drawing with Ireland and the Netherlands, but remained winless going into the decisive game against Egypt, who were returning to the World Cup after a 56-year absence. And in the 56th minute, England scored the decisive goal. No, the 58th minute. But wouldn't the 56th have been perfect? Either way, the win secured first place in a group where no other team managed a victory. Debutant Ireland drew with Egypt and the Dutch, who also drew with each other. The last draw in the group was the drawing of lots to split the Irish and the Dutch, since they finished on identical records. But it's worth noting Ireland would have still finished second under today's fair play rules. The Irish then beat Romania on penalties in the last 16, reaching the quarterfinals without winning a match in a normal time, before losing to hosts Italy. England advanced past Belgium thanks to David Platt's brilliant late volley, setting up a quarter-final against arguably the tournament's biggest talking point, Cameroon. The indomitable Lions began their campaign by stunning holders Argentina. I wouldn't have been able to predict that, but I'm still gonna make predictions for the World Cup playoffs in March, and of course the final tournament too. Subscribe so you don't miss that, or any of my other videos. Anyways, Cameroon finished the match against Argentina with just 9 players, an omen for how brutally they'd play all summer. To be fair though, one team was even dirtier, Argentina. So if any side deserved this Cameroon, it was probably them. Argentina recovered by beating the Soviet Union, but only advanced as a third-place team after drawing with Romania. Cameroon beat the Romanians, then lost heavily to the Soviets, somewhat bizarrely winning the group with a negative goal difference. In the last 16, René Higuita's antics helped Cameroon eliminate Colombia, whose overdue World Cup return ended in a disappointment. Roger Milla became the oldest goalscorer in World Cup history, a record he'd break again 4 years later. Milla didn't score in the quarterfinal, but Platt did, giving England the lead. Cameroon turned the match around in the second half, and were minutes away from becoming the first African side to reach a World Cup semi-final, until 2 Lineker penalties rescued England, who advanced by the skin of their teeth again. That's not to say England's run was undeserved, unworthy of celebration or unimportant for the country, but I do find it slightly overrated. The margins were fine. A single group stage win, a last-minute volley against Belgium, a penalty in the 83rd minute preventing yet another quarter-final exit. But to be fair, England almost made the final. Paul Gascoigne famously realized he'd miss it after getting booked as he burst into tears. England forced extra time against West Germany with another late equalizer, but lost on penalties. West Germany, meanwhile, had looked convincing throughout. They opened by easing past Yugoslavia, one of the world's best teams at the time, and the last true Yugoslav national team to appear at a major tournament, if you ask me. Later versions were effectively Serbia and Montenegro. Italia 90's Yugoslavia represented all 6 republics. Germany then brushed aside debutant UAE and secured the top spot by drawing Colombia. The last 16 brought a rematch with the Dutch, who had beaten the Germans on home soil en route to winning Euro 88. It was a hostile affair, especially between Frank Rijkaard and Rudi Völler, and Germany prevailed. Czechoslovakia followed, then England on penalties, setting up a final rematch with Argentina, who won in 86. After the Argentines' underwhelming group stage, they beat Brazil in what was considered a pretty big upset at the time, aided by spiked water. The quarter-final against Yugoslavia was even tighter. Goicoechea saved them in the shootout, even though Maradona missed, though he was still by far Argentina's best player at the tournament. The semi-final against hosts Italy took place in Naples, where Maradona was practically worshipped. Italy had won every match without conceding until Argentina equalized, undoing Salvatore Schillaci's 5th goal of the tournament. Argentina ultimately advanced on penalties again. Italy went on to beat England for bronze, while Argentina and West Germany fought for the title. Like Italia 90 as a whole, the final was arguably the worst in World Cup history. Cynical, low quality, and dirty. Argentina's Pedro Monzon became the first player ever sent off in a World Cup final. His teammate Gustavo De Zotti followed near the end of the match, after Andreas Brehme scored the winner from a contentious penalty, awarded by Mexican referee Edgardo Codazal. He was Mexico's biggest contribution to Italia 90, since they were banned for fielding overaged players at the 1988 CONCACAF Under-20 tournament, which they didn't even win. Mexico's absence in the qualifiers helped pave the way for the US long overdue return and Costa Rica's debut. The Americans lost every match, while Costa Rica sensationally reached the knockouts. Of course, most notably beating Sweden, which is obviously the biggest upset in World Cup history by miles. Anyways, whether the finals penalty was correct or not, the Germans had earlier penalty shouts that went unawarded. Argentina had one too, but West Germany were clearly the better team, and worthy world champions. Franz Beckenbauer became the first person to win the World Cup as both a player and now a coach. Now that I've briefly summarized Italia 90 and covered some of the most memorable moments, my incredible storytelling skills might have fooled you into thinking it was actually a good tournament, but no. Despite some iconic moments and compelling storylines, by World Cup standards, it was bad. It's also possible that my storytelling skills are terrible, which I can still appreciate on some level, since it thematically fits with Italia 90 also being bad. Speaking of bad, I think you'll enjoy this video on Sweden's struggling national team.